Okay, so here we have our tail gearbox, and what I'm going to bring your attention to is that there's a little hole here, and this plastic piece which has a locator pin in it, which you can see there. Just move this up a bit closer. You can see the locator pin on that. That goes into that hole, like so. And then you can see there's a locator pin coming through there on the inside. Now that is going to locate into the tail boom. So here I have the tail boom, and you can see just there's a hole in the tail boom, and that's what we want that locator pin to go into. So to put this tail gearbox onto the boom, we're basically going to slide it in and get the locator pin in that hole, and then bolt it up. But before we bolt it up, we actually need to put the vertical stabilizer on these two screws as well, because that needs to go on there. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and install this onto here so you can see what that looks like. Okay, and there we have the tail gearbox installed onto the tail boom. You can see that on there. These two screws you need to put some Loctite on. The locator pin is in the correct place on the boom, so this is now nice and solid, and it can't come out. As with the main rotor head, you need to go over the whole of the tail system and check every single bolt and make sure that it's got Loctite on it if it's a metal to metal bolt. I've been over the whole of this and checked everything, and there were a few bolts in here that didn't have any Loctite on them, so you know, you've been warned. You do need to go through this and make sure that there are traces of Loctite on every single bolt that goes metal to metal, otherwise one of those is going to come out in flight and it's going to be expensive. Okay, so that's that part done. The next part for me is to install the torque tube itself into the boom, and I'll show you what's involved in doing that. Okay, here we have the torque tube, and what you have to do is you have to put this little bearing inside a rubber holder onto the torque tube, like so, but it mustn't go on the centre point of the torque tube. It has to be offset by 10 to 15 centimetres. Now my torque tube is 37 centimetres long, so what I've done is I've set the position for mine to be 17.5 centimetres from one end, which puts it 15 millimetres offset from the centre, and then you basically just use some CA to glue it in place, and then you can grease it or oil it up and push it down into the tail boom, and that's the torque tube installation done. So I'm going to glue this bearing in place now, and then we'll oil that up and insert it down into the tail boom. Okay, we have the bearing now installed on the torque tube, slightly offset from centre. It spins freely, as you can see. And the next task is to take some oil. I've just got some standard Cycle 3-in-1 oil here, and put it onto the bearing and then slide that down into the boom. And the oil is just to ease this rubber down through the boom, rather than pulling the rubber off of the bearing. So it's just to allow that to move through the boom without coming away from the bearing itself. So I shall go ahead and install that. Okay, and then we have it. You can see the end of the torque tube just poking out there, and if I twist that you can see the tail turning at the other end. So that's now installed and working correctly, and we can now look at inserting this into the rear of the main frames, and connecting up the boom supports, etc. Okay, so before we put that boom on, what I've got here is the one-piece undercarriage for the T-Rex 450 Pro, and we're just going to install this onto the main frames first so that we've got a stable base effectively for the boom to then sit into, so that the whole machine will stand up on its own. So I'm just going to screw this on through these two holes here into the bottom of the main frames, and then we can look at connecting up the boom. Okay, and then we have the undercarriage installed. You can see the two screws into the bottom there, and with some Loctite on, and that's the undercarriage in place. So we can now have a stable base. It will stand up on its own. So I can look at installing the boom in the back here. Okay, so there we go. I've pushed the boom into the back of the main frames and done a little bit of wiggling of the torque tube to get it to locate into the slot, and that's now engaged. So when I turn the main gear here, if we bring down the end here, you can see that the tail is spinning there and going the correct direction. So that's the boom inserted, and once you've done that, you can then do up these screws here nice and tight with some Loctite to clamp the boom in place. And then following that, we can put the horizontal tail fin on and the boom supports to give the boom some much needed stiffness and strength from the main frames. Okay, so I'll go ahead and tighten those screws up and fit the horizontal stabiliser. Okay, so here we have the boom supports, and these come pre-assembled and done, so there's nothing to do on those. The horizontal fin, and then if I just shove those out of the way, I can bring you in a bit closer here. You can see there's the horizontal fin clamp, and we're going to install that onto the boom and clamp it down so it holds everything nicely together. So I'll go and do that, and I'll show you which way this is orientated on the boom as a part of that. Okay, here we have the horizontal fin clamp installed, and if I turn it like this, you can see how it goes, in that the fin clamp has a sort of a forward position on it that the screw is in, and that goes to the front of the helicopter, and then the rest of the block with the screw to clamp it on is behind that, and then we can follow the boom support down, and you can see where that clamps on right above the skid, and obviously the same for the other side, and this is just a screw into the metal of the frame. As you can see the metal piece under there that the screws are going into, so Loctite on those to hold those in place, and similarly for all of the screws up the back here on the horizontal fin clamp, they should all be Loctited as well, and then tightened up nice and tight to give the boom some nice support to get rid of tail vibration, that kind of stuff. Okay, so that's if I scroll out, zoom out here, give you an overview of where we are with the helicopter so far. We've installed our servos, we've got the rotor head on with the paddles installed, see the main gear is in, we've got the undercarriage on, we've installed the tail boom supports, horizontal fin clamp, and the tail gearbox is installed as well. So the next step is to start looking at doing the push rods for the servos. We've got a pinion to put on the motor and the motor mesh to set. There's a gyro to install, and a receiver to install into the machine, and we also haven't yet put the tail servo in this back position here. So a fair bit to do just yet, but I'm going to do the push rods for the head next to get those in place, and then follow that up with installing the tail servo and the tail push rod.